Okay, this is Carlos Arce.
and Esmeralda Arce.
Join us on an adventure and discover my world of creative writing. T- Today we'll be reading Harvester by Carlos A. Arce. Detective Franklin stood admiring the well kept garden with its elephant ear plants, surrounded by small ferns, begonias, and other colorful flowers. The dirt was still damp from being lightly watered, and at each end of the garden were fake stones that served as solar powered speakers. Smooth jazz spilled out from each one, meant to stimulate their growth, but also to set the mood for tranquility. He walked over to the patio and sat down, waiting for Michelle Croft to bring him the tea so they could start their second case interview. There was just something that did not add up about her, and that really bothered him. He did not like it when things did not wrap up neatly. He got his notepad and pen out just as she walked in with their tea. So, if this is where it happened, where is the body, Michelle? Detective Franklin asked. She looked around. He looked around the patio as if trying to find clues. Spill it, lady. Just come out with it, will you?
Detective, I'm not going to make it that easy for you.
Replied Michelle. She gave him a coy smile as she gently handed him the cup of tea. She pulled out a chair and sat down with both legs crossed. Her every move and gesture portrayed her as a woman of class, but meant to reassure him with a false sense of security. Fine, let's play it your way then, shall we? He inhaled and squinted his eyes, showing his growing frustration at her games. His leg bounced up and down, trying to contain the frustration.
We shall. After all, this is my story to tell.
She sipped on her tea without taking her eyes off of him. Detective Franklin pulled out a Zippo lighter and lit her Virginia Slim as she began her story.
Do you know the average weight for an organ transplant, Will?
Michelle asked. It's Detective Franklin, Miss Croft, the detective reminded her. You will be wise to remember that. He closed the Zippo with a flick of his wrist and leaned back into his chair.
Play nice, Will, or else.
She waved her finger at him, laughing softly. Continue, Michelle. He clenched his jaw in defiance.
As I was saying,
Michelle said.
a person can wait 3 to 5 years for an organ. And that is a long wait for someone facing a life or death situation.
What does that have to do with you and the abducted children? The detective responded as he scribbled into his notepad.
You see, an abductor of children, I like to think of myself as an entrepreneur or supplier.
She said.
I had an officer in the Navy tell me, see a need, fill a need.
Will sipped his cup of tea. The hot sun beat down on the patio as he surveyed the garden. Despite the scorching heat, the large elephant ear plants seemed healthy compared to others in the neighboring terraces. So, you are telling me that you are into organ harvesting for the black market? He asked.
I am into saving lives for a cost, if you will.
She replied. She puffed on her cigarette and exhaled the smoke lightly towards the detective. Is that why you needed that child? Franklin asked as he waved off the cigarette smoke from his face. For its precious organs? That is disgusting. disgusting.
That is just a small piece of the big picture.
What do you mean?
A human body has more uses than just its organs.
What?
Science requires more than just organs from human bodies, detective.
You sound like this was not your first time doing this.
First time?
Michelle laughed.
No, not at all. Just my first mistake.
She puffed the last of her cigarette and tossed it into what remained of her tea. Will stood up, walked to the edge of the concrete, and looked at the garden soil. He noticed something odd about it. Small white particles were mixed in with it. At the other end, an open, medium sized bag of garden soil was propped up next to the wooden privacy fence. Sweat formed on his receding hairline and dripped down his face. He took his small notepad and fanned himself. I'm sick of this trivia game. If there are more, where are the bodies?
There are no more bodies. At least, not in the way you expect them to be.
What is that supposed to mean?
It means every part of my victims has been used and sold.
Michelle continued. Detective Franklin knelt and cupped a handful of soil to inspect it. He sifted through it, separated the white fragments from the earth, and examined them closely. A sick feeling overcame him, and his head started to spin. The thought of all this is making me ill, he said.
Oh, Will, it is not the thought of it that is making you ill. It is the rohypnol I slipped into your drink that you are feeling.
My department will come looking for me,
You mean Captain Gonzalez?
Michelle said.
She is quite good at sending me healthy specimens.
What?
Oh, her and I have had quite a great mutually beneficial business venture together.
She watched William as he began losing his balance. No, that cannot be true, Will struggled to comprehend Captain Gonzalez's betrayal. No!
You're going to help me fulfill many orders with that healthy body of yours.
Michelle said as he collapsed onto the soil in the garden with the bones of dead children.
Like I was saying, Will,
Michelle said.
even the bones have their use and clientele. Take my garden, for example.
What about the garden?
The soil. The soil is fertilized with the bones of children.
Children? He asked. As in plural?
Of course, plural. You're not a very imaginative, decorated detective.
As he lay on the soil, the image of small bones being ground down filled his mind. The children!
Will, you found them, and now you can join them.
Michelle laughed as she turned his body over and blew him a kiss.
Congratulations, you solved the case.
That was Harvester. I hope you enjoyed this story that I wrote at the beginning of my journey in Full Sail.
How did you come up with the concept of this story?
The concept of this story came to me from a picture prompt that our teacher gave us. It was a picture of an empty hotel room with a garden patio. And since I love writing horror, my thinking went to what could possibly have happened in that room. And it dawned on me that a possible crime could have been committed there, and I went with it.
Well, I truly liked this story because it showed a strong female villain, and she believed in what she was doing was right, even though the law and the cost showed that it was not.
All right, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on our next adventure in the
Psychoverse.